In 2012, a city woke up to silence. Not the calm kind, not the peaceful kind. A silence where emergency lines didn't ring, where operators stared at screens that wouldn't stop flashing, where calls came in endlessly, but none of them made sense. Fire departments couldn't be reached. Ambulances couldn't be dispatched. Police lines were flooded beyond recovery. At first, it looked like a technical failure, a glitch, a bad update, a hardware malfunction. But within hours, it became clear that this wasn't an accident. The city's phone system wasn't broken. It had been hijacked. Thousands of phones across the city had been turned into something else. Not communication devices, weapons. By the end of the day, investigators would realize they weren't dealing with a denial-of-service attack in the traditional sense. They were dealing with something far stranger, a zombie phone network. And the city was trapped inside it. In the early 2010s, mobile phones were everywhere, but they weren't what they are today. Smartphones existed, but they weren't dominant. Feature phones still ruled entire demographics. Telecom networks were complex, layered, and deeply trusted. Most people assumed phone calls were simple. You dial, it rings, someone answers. Behind the scenes, the reality was far more fragile. Telecom systems were built on decades-old protocols. Many were designed in an era when attacks like this weren't considered possible. Security was assumed, not enforced. And in 2012, that assumption would collapse. The group behind the attack didn't start with malware. They didn't infect phones with viruses or Trojans. They didn't need to. Instead, they went after the infrastructure, the telecom backend. Specifically, the signaling systems that control how calls are routed, connected, and terminated. Systems designed to be invisible to users. Systems trusted by default. Systems that, if abused, could control millions of devices at once. In telecom networks, there exists a quiet layer that does most of the work. Call setup, call teardown, location tracking, billing, emergency routing. In 2012, much of this relied on protocols that assumed anyone inside the network was legitimate. That assumption turned out to be catastrophic. Somewhere along the chain, the attackers gained access. Exactly how remains disputed. Some say it was a compromised vendor account. Others believe it was stolen credentials from a subcontractor. There are theories involving misconfigured remote management systems. What matters is this: they didn't need full control. They only needed enough access to send instructions. Once inside, they discovered something terrifying. Phones don't decide when to make calls, the network does. With the right commands, a telecom system can instruct phones to dial numbers automatically. No user interaction, no confirmation, no visible warning. The attackers tested it carefully at first. A handful of devices, short calls, no pattern, nothing triggered alarms. Then they scaled. Thousands of phones across the city were quietly queued with instructions. At a specific time, they would all begin dialing. Not random numbers, emergency services, fire, police, medical dispatch, every few seconds. Relentlessly. When the attack started, emergency operators initially thought it was a prank. Then the calls kept coming, and coming, and coming. Phones rang faster than operators could answer. Lines filled instantly. Calls dropped and reconnected. Systems slowed under the load. But when operators answered, there was no one there. Just silence, or static, or a brief click before the line disconnected. It didn't take long to realize something was wrong. Emergency services tried to reroute calls. They tried to activate overflow systems. They tried to contact telecom providers. But the flood didn't stop. Because the phones weren't being called, They were calling out. Thousands of them, all at once. These weren't hacked smartphones running malware. These were normal phones, office phones, home phones, pay phones, mobile devices, completely unaware of what they were doing. The city's emergency infrastructure was being attacked by its own residents' devices. Ambulance dispatchers couldn't hear real emergencies. Fire calls were buried beneath automated noise. Police lines were unreachable. For hours, the city effectively lost its emergency response system. Hospitals reported delays. Fire departments switched to radio dispatch. Police officers were sent out blind, without real-time updates. And the public had no idea. From their perspective, phones still worked. They could make calls, they could receive messages. They just couldn't reach help. Behind the scenes, telecom engineers were scrambling. At first, they suspected hardware failure, then misconfiguration, then traffic overload. But as logs were examined, a disturbing pattern emerged. Calls weren't coming from random numbers. They were being generated systematically, automatically. The same devices, over and over, devices that shouldn't have been able to do this. That's when the word started circulating quietly among engineers. Zombie phones, devices that looked alive, but were no longer under user control. The telecom provider attempted to block outbound calls to emergency numbers. That helped briefly. Then the attackers adapted. The calls shifted to alternate emergency routing numbers, local dispatch lines, overflow centers, secondary systems, anything that could reach responders. It was clear this wasn't random chaos. It was deliberate. Someone understood the emergency routing architecture. Someone knew where to apply pressure. As the hours passed, the consequences became real. Delayed response times, missed calls, unanswered emergencies. There were reports of fires that took longer to respond to, medical emergencies that relied on neighbors instead of dispatchers. Police responses coordinated manually over radio. The city wasn't just inconvenienced, it was vulnerable. Eventually, engineers took drastic action. Entire segments of the network were shut down. Cell towers were temporarily disabled. Call routing tables were rewritten on the fly. Large blocks of phones were disconnected without warning. For many residents, their phones suddenly stopped working. But emergency lines began to breathe again. The flood slowed, then stopped. By the time the attack was contained, it had lasted several hours. In some reports, nearly half a day. The aftermath was messy. Telecom providers faced intense scrutiny. Government agencies demanded answers. Emergency services filed reports detailing failures. And investigators began trying to understand what had happened. What they found was unsettling. The attackers didn't exploit a single bug. They exploited trust. Telecom signaling systems were never designed with hostile insiders in mind. Once you're inside the network, you're believed. Authentication was weak or non-existent. Logging was minimal. Abuse detection assumed good faith. The attackers didn't need sophisticated malware. They needed access and knowledge. And they had both. Even more disturbing was how quiet the attack was. There were no ransom demands. No political statements, no bragging posts. The attack didn't destroy data. It didn't steal money. It simply demonstrated power. The power to turn a city's phones against itself. In the months that followed, telecom providers quietly patched systems. Access controls were tightened. Monitoring was improved. Emergency routing was redesigned. But many changes happened silently. There was no public reckoning. Most people never learned how close the city came to disaster. No official casualty numbers were ever definitively linked to the outage. But emergency responders would later admit something chilling. If the attack had lasted longer, If it had been timed differently, lives could have been lost. The zombie phone incident became a case study inside telecom circles, rarely discussed publicly, frequently referenced privately, because it exposed a truth few wanted to admit. Modern cities depend on systems built for a more trusting world. And when those systems fail, they don't fail gracefully. They fail all at once. Today, telecom networks are more secure, but they're also more complex, more interconnected, more dependent on automation. The attack from 2012 wasn't sophisticated by today's standards, but it didn't need to be. It attacked the assumptions, not the code. And that's what made it dangerous. Somewhere right now, phones are sitting quietly on desks and in pockets. They feel personal. They feel safe. They feel under our control. But in reality, they're part of something much larger. A system that can be instructed, redirected, abused. The city survived the zombie phone attack. Barely. And most people never even knew it happened. But the vulnerability it revealed never fully disappeared. It just went quiet, waiting.